Ah, slashers. You give us so much joy with your ridiculous characters, high body count, and great times to be had. Amongst our summertime celebrations, something else was steadily creeping up on us. That's right. We've got a day chosen for its bad luck that has been completely overtaken by a domineering, hockey mask-wearing psychopath. Friday the 13th. So many to choose from, 12 exactly, yet the decision is never easy. Go with the original, even though it doesn't have Jason as we know him? Do we do part 4, where we have Corey Feldman debuting the Tommy Jarvis character? Or do we go with something totally out of left field and see what Jason gets up to when he goes on big boats to metropolitan areas?
What that meat slime bag! Yo man, it's cool. It's cool, man. It's cool.
No. If we're going to look at one Friday the 13th to praise, we have to look at the most universally loved film. Yes sir, today we're diving into the world of Jason Lives.
Jason belongs in hell. I'm gonna see he gets there.
Seeing as how this is the 6th film in the series, we better give you some background. For those unaware, Friday the 13th all started when little mongoloid Jason Voorhees drowned in Camp Crystal Lake due to counselor neglect. Getting revenge for her son, Pamela Voorhees attacked the counselors responsible, as well as anyone that tried to open the camp again. Only things didn't end so well for Pamela. And turns out that Jason was actually still alive, and he's a hillbilly mountain man now. Well, he was. Then he becomes this weird bald mongoloid. It can be a tad confusing, but he at least gets his hockey mask here, so there's some consistency with that. So Jason sets up shop at Crystal Lake and murders anyone who happens to piss him off in his territory. His time frame is up for debate though, because this is the Jarvis family. They live in a house at Crystal Lake, yet Jason doesn't seem to bother them for a very long time. Until he doesn't. Only that turns out to be a big mistake for him. So it can be kind of confusing. So much so that he ends up in a variety of mental wards. He knows Jason is still alive. Eventually, he and his buddy head to Jason's grave to put his suspicions to rest once and for all. This is when we get to the good stuff. Irony. Noun. The expression of one's meaning by using language that normally signifies the opposite, typically for humorous or emphatic effect. Tommy makes the boneheaded decision to accidentally resurrect Jason, which sets him on a mission to kill Mr. Voorhees. Put him in a grave. The exact thing that was already happening before Tommy decided to butt in. Racked with guilt, he goes to tell the local police about it. Only they don't believe him. Surprise, surprise. You know who does believe him though? The sheriff's super cute daughter, Megan. So Tommy and Megan set out on a journey to put Jason back in the ground. It involves several car chases, getting locked up, and even holding up a police officer with a gun. The stakes are high, which makes sense because Jason is in a particularly kill-friendly mood. Just look at this business retreat that he interrupts. That's right, some company decides that they're going to do their business retreat on little old Camp Crystal Lake. Not only that, but they're going to have a paintball tournament in the woods. While we only see 5 people, it's implied that there are even more, so who knows how many Jason actually killed in the process. But we get this cool triple murder out of it. Jason goes on a bit of a rampage throughout the camp, even teasing that he's going to kill some of the child campers.
So, what were you gonna be when you grew up?
Thankfully, it doesn't come to that, and he just kills a bunch of counselors and cops instead. But once he runs out of cops and counselors... Tommy stops Jason in the nick of time and lures him out into the water. Not really thinking of the fact that Jason does just fine in water, something that other films seem to forget. After a lot of struggling, Tommy is able to wrap Jason up in a massive chain and send him down to the lake bed, trapped forever. Just kidding, a telekinetic teenager sets him free because she's thinking hard about her dead dad. Yeah.
I've seen enough horror movies to know any weirdo wearing a mask is never friendly.
This killer is so absurdly popular that he has his very own specific theme music. You hear that iconic score and your mind begins to conjure the hulking form of the hockey mask wearing psychopath. He's on the Mount Rushmore of horror for a reason. Let's just look at his resume leading up to this point. Friday Part 1. doesn't directly kill anyone, but his mother kills 9 people, all in the name of little mongoloid Jason. Friday Part 2. Jason kills 9 different people, including macheteing a handicapped man in the face. Friday Part 3. This time Jason takes his killing to a whole other dimension and 12 more people meet their maker, including this particularly brutal chop to a man's nether regions. Friday Part 4. Jason manages to take out 13 miscreants before being taken out himself and becoming worm food. Friday Part 5. Well, no point in talking about this one because, spoiler alert, it was an imposter because Jason is super dead and definitely not coming back. Though I guess we can give him credit for killing these 2 gentlemen in the beginning. Sure, it was a dream and all, but we're looking at the silver lining here. We won't count that towards the total though. So that brings us to Part 6, and surprise surprise, he's back like Frankenstein's monster. And he's starting off with a total body count so far of 34. Despite this being the 5th sequel, it's also only Jason's 4th film, which makes the count all the more impressive. He definitely gets some points here. He punches through a guy's chest, shoves a girl's face through a wall, and straight up bends this policeman in half. But even then, the kills in this are very mild compared to the rest of the series. This was coming at a time where the Motion Picture Association of America was looking to make an example of slasher movies, and the Friday the 13th series was firmly in their crosshairs. Unfortunate, but we still got some creative kills out of it. They just cut away quickly and don't go too overboard with the blood. And to say that Jason Voorhees has mommy issues would be the understatement of the century. This guy is ready to kill absolutely every single person that even steps foot on his land. You do that and you may as well have killed Jason's mom yourself because he's coming for you. But if you leave his land, he doesn't really seem to care all too much so long as you weren't the one to actually kill his mother. So this makes Jason very unique from Freddy or Michael, who really go the extra mile to finish any job they start. The only issue is that none of his would-be victims ever seem to realize that, and they tend to stick around to die. Just go anywhere that's not Crystal Lake, you dummies. While Jason has been portrayed in a variety of ways in past films, his look from Part 4 on has been pretty set in stone, with minor differences here and there. That is until this monstrosity, but we don't need to talk about that. And when it comes to the actor underneath the hockey mask, the story of Part 6 becomes even more complicated. Most genre fans know CJ Graham as the Part 6 Jason. If you weren't aware of him due to his vicious performance as Voorhees, you were probably aware of his super friendly demeanor on the horror convention circuit. But if I were to tell you that he didn't play Jason for a scene in the movie, do you think you'd be able to pick that one out? Really wasn't that hard, was it? When production kicked off, Jason Voorhees was to be portrayed by this man, Dan Bradley, and producers immediately noted how hefty he had gotten since they'd seen him last.
For a person who had been dead for a long time, he had been eating pretty well.
So he was promptly replaced by CJ Graham, and the rest is history.
Court, you didn't already.
Oh, come on, wasn't that the end of the song?
With the film being such a tribute to past Friday films, you'd think that the nudity would be in full force, but instead we're treated to what amounts to a PG-13. No boobs, no bush, nothing. The 2 leads, Tommy and Megan, are both attractive and their flirty nature is fun to watch. But that's about it. Instead, we get a sex scene that amounts to a lot of grinding between Nikki and Court. But it does lead to one of the coolest sequences of the series. Sorry, we were getting sidetracked by murder. Back to the sex. There's a combination of attractive dudes and ladies throughout the film, but this may as well be PG-13. In fact, this is the only film in the entire Friday the 13th franchise without any nudity. But that's just the thing. We wanted to show that you don't need TNA to be a good slasher, just like you don't need fun characters or original deaths. But dagnabbit, you better have 2 out of 3.
During my love scene, they had a little powwow and said, we don't have any nudity in this. So they asked me if I'd be interested in doing it topless, and the contracts had been signed, so that just didn't seem to pan out.
Wait. So they realized that they didn't have any nudity at the last minute? This seems like a pretty big oversight for a Friday the 13th. Though maybe after the near porno that Part 5 ended up being, it was probably time to dial things back.
Jason belongs in hell, and I'm gonna see he gets there.
There are plenty of interesting scenes to talk about from this film. From the RV scene to the paintball sequence, Being unique is all that director Tom McLaughlin seems to do. But the movie really stands out with its opening. You see a truck speed off down the road. The intensity on Tommy's face tells us all we need to know. He's a man on a mission. Having been haunted by visions of Jason since childhood, he's set to finish the job. Tommy's whole plan is to burn up Jason's corpse so that he can't come back to life. Joining him on this mission is his buddy Alan, played by Ron Palillo of Welcome Back Kotter fame. They met at the sanitarium and he's joining his mission because I'm not really sure why. He clearly doesn't want to be there. His trust in Tommy must be really, really high.
Hell, I must be crazy.
Poor guy. Tommy and Alan arrive at the cemetery and we're treated to this wonderful gothic look. With the lightning, you can imagine this is a scene from an old Universal film. In fact, let's make this black and white. Better. The contrast of the colors is really what makes this sequence shine, and nothing showcases that better than desaturating the image. Especially once they start digging up the grave and we get an even better look at the surroundings. Absolute magic. In fact, if you've never watched the entirety of Jason Lives in black and white, it's highly recommended you do so, as evidenced by this. Back to color, Tommy and Alan dig up the casket, and surprisingly, Jason is still there, untouched. Letting out all of his frustrations, he stabs the corpse of Jason with a massive metal pole. It's funny to think that all of this could have been avoided if Tommy simply had a little bit of anger management. Oh well. Tommy's a man on a mission, and his mission is to burn this rotting corpse. That's when the universal horror of it all really comes into play, as we get a Frankenstein revival of Jason as lightning strikes down upon the pole, sending what I assume is 1.21 gigawatts of electricity into his body. And just like Frankenstein's monster, Jason is reborn. But Tommy is completely ignorant to this and instead just thinks about how he just can't leave that fence pole in Jason's body, because that would be disrespectful. So he struggles getting the pole out and has to get down into the grave to get proper leverage.
My heart can't take any more of this.
Jason springs into action and tries to get Tommy. They struggle a bit and Tommy knows he needs to finish his plan. He gets the gasoline ready and what's a little lightning without a little rain? Oh, the irony of this scene is just too good that you can practically see Tom McLaughlin smiling in the background. Alan tries to save the day, but that proves to be a major mistake. Well, at least he was right about his heart. Tommy speeds off down the road with the same mission of stopping Jason. Only this time Jason actually needs to be stopped. Again, the irony. Back at the cemetery, Jason turns to camera and we get this super slick James Bond title sequence. If only they'd gone all the way and gone full Bond through the titles a la Goldfinger and had body parts flying around as the credits rolled. Still, it's extremely fun and sets the tone early that this isn't like any Friday before it. And while they didn't know, there would never be another Friday like it again.
Wherever the red dot goes, you bang.
Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, opened up to $6.7 million at the box office on opening weekend. $1.5 million less than Part 5. As is often the case with ongoing franchises, the films that are poorly received will then affect the box office receipts of its sequel, no matter how good. And that was certainly the case here. Audiences felt burned by A New Beginning, when Jason technically wasn't even in the movie. Would the same thing happen again where it's another imposter? Some people weren't convinced, and Jason Lives wasn't able to reach its true potential because of it. Instead, Paramount was looking at their most expensive Friday the 13th yet, and they brought in $2 million less than the previous film. As this trend continued with subsequent films, Paramount decided they wanted out of the series they often considered a redheaded stepchild. So in stepped The House That Freddy Built, and New Line took over the franchise. While the results have been fairly polarizing, there's a lot of love and reverence for the series amongst its makers now. Unfortunately, the Friday the 13th rights are a bit of a mess currently. Victor Miller says he owns elements, while Sean Cunningham says he owns elements. They've been duking it out in court for years, and we don't appear any closer to a new Friday film. Unless you believe Corey Feldman, which is a tall order these days. Even Part 3's Larry Zerner, now an entertainment lawyer, has said he doesn't see this ending anytime soon. So while we don't have any new Fridays on the horizon, at least we have a whole catalog to go back on and enjoy. And right there at the top of the heap is Jason Lives, with its fun tone.
Does he think I'm a fart head?
Meta story.
Look, there's no time for this bullshit. Jason's gotta be stopped.
And its lead man just having a good old time hacking and slashing some miscreants. Hell, he even gets to take out some Wall Street types. Just because you're not at Camp Crystal Lake, there's always a Friday the 13th around the corner.
It's hard to have a series 7 movies in and expect anything truly different. In horror, anything past, let's say, part 4, by its very nature needs to start embracing some sort of schlock.
You weren't gonna ask me to marry you?
What are you, f***ing nuts?
Or it risks the killer of all storytelling, the silent death of being tedious and boring. Friday the 13th Part 7 came off the heels of The Rebirth. After A New Beginning failed to reboot a Jason-less entry, Part 6 came out f***ing swinging, injecting humor, a superhuman Voorhees, and over-the-top kills. The New Blood took Part 6's style with a more serious approach, bringing in series favorite Kane Hodder and his raging, bold interpretation of the Crystal Lake Killer. I have seen Friday the 13th Part 7 go from underdog to somewhat appreciated, back down to a lesser entry. Not my words. I mean, dude, Entertainment Weekly, Sci-Fi, and I'm old enough to remember when it was spelled correctly, IndieWire, just to name a few. But I just can't understand how this can rank so low in a series that, at its core, has always been fun, sort of meat and potatoes. Now listen, I get that if you grew up with the series as they were released, that yeah, by the time telekinesis shows up, maybe the brand has jumped the shark. Or that yeah, it's no longer scary. Both very reasonable responses, and if that's how you feel, cool. I hope life treats you well and wish you health and good fortune. But yeah, I'm here to have a good time and can appreciate the serious entries alongside the goofy ones. And putting a B-level carry, she's not by the way, Lara Park Lincoln owns it here, against the most visibly upset Jason is my kind of good time. To me, he was my murdering Power Ranger when I was but a small child, and would root for him over any teen. So to me, I've always been Team Jason. Taking over directing duties for this entry is effects artist extraordinaire, the late Mr. John Carl Buechler. And just because I never felt he was quite as recognized as his peers, let me sidestep real quick. You need to check out his flawless run over at Full Moon. And of course, a spiritual successor to Friday the 13th, Hatchet. The man was as talented as he was kind. Tommy Jarvis has chained Jason to the bottom of Camp Crystal Lake. And it's here we start. And in the best and last recap of the series, by actually Crazy Ralph himself, Walt Gorney, he lets us know.
People forget he's down there.
Classic 80s, man, I just love it. Tina, Lara Park Lincoln, is taken back to Crystal Lake with the intention of hopefully getting over her trauma from killing her dad years earlier. Alongside her is her mom, Mrs. Shepard, with a haircut so 80s. David Bowie would have snorted it and Robert Palmer would have put it in his backing band.
If it's in fact true, what happened?
They are accompanied by Dr. Cruz, legendary Bernie Lomax himself, Terry Kaiser. Dr. Cruz hopes to stress Tina out, and in doing so, coerce her into using her special abilities, aka telekinesis.
The only reason that I'm here is to help you overcome the guilt that you have about your father's death.
At the neighboring lake house is a birthday party for Michael, and it's here we meet side hero Nick, played by Kevin Spiritus, and then the rest of the cannon fodder teens. But, obviously, as Raoul Duke once said,
Let's get down to brass tacks here.
what is New Blood's most iconic scene? What here can define the 7th entry into the increasingly wacky Friday the 13th series? Easy. The ending house fight. The crescendo of Jason's warpath. Starting with Melissa's refusal to stay put. She declares there is better places to be with a fiery.
Fuck you. Now fuck you both!
And in one of my favorite yet simple kills, Jason decides, leaving in an option. Puts a hatchet in her head and tosses the body right over the f***ing TV. Now, I want to give credit here to Susan Jennifer Sullivan. Melissa is a one-note rich bitch character, but Susan really nails that snooty and prissy tone. I still hate the character nearly this many years later, so kudos Susan for going all in. Beekler's blocking here is fantastic. I love the jump to handheld when Nick and Tina try to leave. Jason trying to predict their next move as he dickishly shuts the door. A little detail that works wonders when shot in this chaotic way. It shows how quick he can be and how f***ing petty. We get set piece after set piece of Tina and Jason sparring off. Now, I know there's an issue that people have with this taking on a more serious tone after part 6, but every time Tina levels up, I believe it. The light to the face, throwing Jason into the stairs. Dude, I'm there. Now, you even get a low in the mix, disappointed sigh for Mr. Voorhees. I feel you, dude. Followed by a decently tense moment where they both need to climb over the giant hole in the stairs. Beekler wisely films this bottom up, giving us the sense that Jason is just out of reach, ready and waiting. And Jason Voorhees busting through things has always been my bread and butter. It's a show of force that's both iconic and cool. As Jason tries to crush Nick with his foot, Tina squeezes his mask straps, oozing yellow pus and saving Nick's life. Now, the Jason face reveal is something that I feel this series is pretty famous for. And they go from pretty traditional, great, iconic to, Muppet? But the new blood not only has the best mask reveal, with Tina squeezing off of him, but the best looking Jason Voorhees face. I said it 100%, don't argue. Kane Hodder's surprised and shocked look with his piercing one eye. But you know what? It's actually the shocked gaping mouth that sells this look. And great job by Hodder, as it's a minute touch but adds a ton of personality. Tina being in her murder with lights phase, strangles our camp killer, sending him down below. Here, Tina fights with nails, leading to a pissed off Jason removing one center head. And his angry look rocks. Jump to a great engulfed fire shot. One in which IMDb noted that set a record for the longest uninterrupted on-screen controlled burn in Hollywood history. And as most things in the 80s were, the whole house was prone to explode at the first spark of life, so Tina and Nick escape with seconds to spare. And right here, we get that good old-fashioned effect of actually blowing shit up. According to the documentary Crystal Lake Memories, the explosion was way bigger than they had anticipated.
Lenses were smashed on the IMOs, filters were melted.
The amped up action mixed in with the lulls of tension and suspense is something that doesn't get brought up much. This ending fight scene really elevates and outdoes most of the Jason ending fights. I know that's not a big popular idea, but it's true. By now they needed to go bigger, and yeah, 7 movies in, I 100% agree. Friday the 13th Part 7 was our introduction to the Kane Hodder era, who gave Jason a style that had not yet been seen prior. John Carl Beekler was great as a director, and brought to life my go-to version of Jason Voorhees. Lar Park Lincoln as Tina was, and still is, one of the best protagonists of the entire series. You get the great Terry Kaiser as a maniacal evil psychiatrist. And listen, anything this man is in is instantly better because Kevin Spiritus makes for a great and sympathetic co-lead in the last act. And side note real quick, he's also excellent in Subspecies 2 and 3, which to me personally are 2 of the most underrated vampire flicks out there. So, if you like this dude, please see him if you haven't. And that's it for Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. The ending house fight is the scene that sums it all up. And that's that. I don't subscribe to the hate. And yes, the MPAA infamously neutered this entry. Yeah, it sucks, but it doesn't affect the overall charm and inventiveness. I still have a great time. And in the end, Part 7 will always be the underdog to me. I'm Lance Velchek, wishing you health, happiness, and some needed time off.
The Friday the 13th franchise can be divided into 2 parts: the Paramount years and everything that came after. The The Paramount years produced 8 movies, 7 of them with Jason Voorhees slashing and stabbing and hacking up teenagers years after his mom got the job started. These movies are comfort food for so many horror fans, including myself. Even though we know full and well that most of the movies aren't of the highest of qualities, at least not by traditional standards, we return to them time and time again. It's the familiarity, the predictability, the pure 80s-ness of them. They're so easy to watch. I'm sure plenty of you have seen them each a dozen or so times, and will see them a dozen or so more times in the foreseeable future. And when you get together with your fellow horror fanatics, you might find yourself debating which of the movies is the best, and which of them is the worst. The title for the best can always be heatedly debated. Is it the final chapter, which I just covered on Real Slashers? Is the original still the one to beat? But the title for the worst can often be settled fairly quickly. Jason Takes Manhattan. Or, as your friend might quip for the millionth time, Jason Takes Vancouver, or Jason Takes a Cruise Ship. Yeah, we know. And of course, this is subjective and there will be votes for part 5. But definitely not either from this writer or this editor. But Jason Takes Manhattan probably gets it on the chin more than any other Friday the 13th movie. And there are legitimate arguments to be made that it deserves the beatings it gets. The claustrophobic boat locale that dominates 2/3 of the movie, the laughable attempt to make Vancouver look like New York, the eye-rolling humor that is frequently attempted.
You don't understand. There is a maniac trying to kill us.
Welcome to New York.
And the ending. Oh boy, that ending. But it remains a fascinating entry in the franchise exactly because of its faults. Not to mention the what might have been factor. When you realize it was originally meant to take place in New York City, with insane set pieces we can now only dream about. That's why the Jason flick only a mother could love deserves to be dissected. So let's do an autopsy on the 8th Friday the 13th film and find out what the f happened to Jason Takes Manhattan. Let's step back a little bit and see how we got here. In May of 1988, Paramount released Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, to a rather encouraging $8.2 million opening weekend. A very decent opening for the time, especially for a horror franchise into its 7th entry. But the good times didn't last long, as New Blood topped out at the domestic box office with a tad over $19 million, which would make it the lowest total gross for the series up until that point. The writing was perhaps on the wall that the series might just be taking its last gasps. But even so, the costs remained so low that the films remained profitable. And so Paramount planned on forging ahead with another film, potentially the last. New Blood's director John Carl Buechler had pitched an idea for a follow-up that would once again star Lar Park Lincoln's telekinetic Tina, while Lincoln herself apparently wrote a script with her husband that would find Tina having a job as a psychiatrist for troubled girls. But Paramount evidently had little enthusiasm for revisiting Tina and sought a different direction. That's too bad, I kinda like Tina. Enter Rob Hedden. Hedden was a television writer with credits on MacGyver, and more crucially, the Friday the 13th TV series. Hedden had directed 2 episodes of the latter show and impressed Paramount. And as the studio was never one to shy away from newbie directors, the studio approached him with an offer to write and direct the new entry. One of Hedden's original ideas was to have Jason go up against Freddy Krueger, but because of complicated rights issues, there was no way to get that made in a timely manner. So Hedden pivoted in a new direction. In his own words, the director said he wanted to get Jason out of that stupid lake where he's been hanging out. And series executive producer Frank Mancuso was on board. But where would Jason go to? One pitch Hedden came up with involved putting Jason on a boat to, quote, put him in the bowels of the ship with a little bit of Das Boot and a little bit of aliens with a claustrophobic feeling. Another pitch was to do a fish out of water story and take him to a big city. That idea Mancuso responded to, saying New York would be the ideal tourist spot for the undead murderer, and so Hedden was off and running. Unlike the film that we ended up receiving, Hedden's early drafts had Jason truly terrorizing New York City. He was going to have a chase sequence on the Brooklyn Bridge, he was going to fight Julius in Madison Square Garden instead of a rooftop, he'd have more to do in Times Square, he was even going to climb atop the Statue of Liberty and hit up a Broadway show. Can you even imagine? What Hedden might not have realized, or perhaps blocked out of his mind, was that Paramount wasn't willing to foot the bill for such fantastic set pieces. The budget was set around $4 million, so Hedden had to pare things down quite a lot. A story that originally took place in New York for about 75% of the running time was altered to take place predominantly on the ship that sails to New York, allowing Hedden to revive his Jason on a boat idea. Now, the idea was to unleash Jason in the city that never sleeps for only the last third of the movie. Now, naturally, New York is an expensive place to film in, so the decision was made to substitute Vancouver for it, however unconvincingly as that may have been. Still, the budget, which ended up being about $5.5 million by the time production started, was the largest in the franchise's history. Hedden went about assembling his cast and crew. Some would argue the most crucial character in the film is Jason himself, and the initial plan was to go with a stuntman based in Vancouver to wear the hockey mask. The producers apparently thought the prior Jason, Kane Hodder, wouldn't want to return, much to the actor's surprise. Hodder lobbied the producers for the role and succeeded, once again playing everyone's favorite rendition of the hulking, brutal Mr. Voorhees. Intriguingly, some of the actors hired didn't realize they were even making a Friday the 13th movie until they were actually on set. V.C. Dupree, who plays Julius, thought he was making a slasher movie called Ashes to Ashes until right before shooting commenced. Add to that the fact that some of the actors didn't even know how their characters were going to die, instead finding out literally the day of shooting, and you got one secretive movie. With the cast set, filming on the Jason flick commenced in Vancouver, but it quickly hit a snag. A key member of the cast was about to get the axe. Figuratively, of course. An actor named Lee Coleman had been cast in the role of Sean Roberts, who plays our heroine Rennie's boyfriend. Coleman had been cast 2 weeks prior, but after one day of filming, Rob Hedden knew he had a problem on his hands. The actor just wasn't working out, and had no chemistry with his leading lady. After just one day of shooting, Coleman was informed by the producers he was being let go. Soon after, actor Scott Reeves got a call and an offer, and obviously had to hightail it to Vancouver to start shooting ASAP. Also let go? The first ship that Hedden had picked out for the film, a big, impressive vessel that would have looked fantastic on screen. Unfortunately for the director, he found out just 3 days prior to shooting that a location issue would make it so they could not use the ship that he wanted. For a replacement, he went with a much smaller ship, but found clever ways of filming it so it actually looked much bigger than it was. The scenes on the ship were actually shot out at sea in a place called Horseshoe Bay in West Vancouver. As for how that ship in a lake would find itself in the ocean, it seems as though Hedden and everyone else were just fine with not caring about that. Logic has never been this franchise's strong suit. Filming was not always a thrill for lead actress Jensen Daggett, who had to get used to getting all kinds of soggy throughout the production. But at least she didn't smash her gums on the side of a rowboat like co-star V.C. Dupree did. Of course, Dupree would get his whole block knocked off in the movie's most famous scene, which, as mentioned, was originally supposed to take place in an actual boxing ring at MSG. Oh, what might have been. Though we probably wouldn't have gotten this amazing dumpster gag right after. Eventually the film gets off the boat and onto the mean streets of, yes, Vancouver, for a series of glum scenes taking place in alleyways and within the supposed New York City sewer, where the toxic waste flows freely. But the filmmakers simply had to have at least one showstopper of a scene take place in the actual Big Apple. So the big moment took place in Times Square, very early in the morning when the crowds wouldn't be so plentiful. Of course, putting Jason on the mean streets of New York City is still going to attract a crowd, even at 3 in the morning. Kane Hodder had said that the most amazing thing that he's ever done as Jason was standing in the middle of Times Square, in full costume, as hundreds of passerbys stood behind barricades, cheering and calling for him like he was the one-man incarnation of the Beatles. But just as he must in every movie, Jason had to die at the end. Perhaps for the last time. Hedden thought there was a real chance that Part 8 would be the final Friday, and so he tried as best he could to come up with a kill that would eliminate Voorhees from the picture for good. A controversial decision, as it turns out, as Hedden came up with that famous wall of toxic waste that we all know plows through the sewers of Manhattan nightly, which would turn a skeletal Jason into, wait, his former young boy self? Huh? How's that work? Is this movie saying that the Fountain of Youth is in the sewers of New York City? Oh my god. If that's not weird enough, the original ending saw the young boy version of Jason attempting to escape through the mouth of the rotting monster. Yeah, it's as bizarre as it sounds. The production built a gigantic skeleton Jason head and had young Tim Merkovich, who happened to be the son of editor Steve Merkovich, attempt to climb through this ridiculous monstrosity. Obviously, it did not look good whatsoever, so the footage was thankfully scrapped. Kane Hodder was not pleased with the ending, to say the least. But he's felt the need in recent years to clear up the rumor that he hates it.
I never hated the end of it. I just thought maybe we could have done something better. But as far as hating it, I never hated it.
Most franchise fans might not be so kind. After shooting and editing were done, there would come yet another fight with the MPAA. Nothing new for this franchise, but the fact is that the film wasn't considerably gory to begin with, and didn't have to endure the kind of major cuts that some of the other films, like Part 7, had to. Still, the system was quite puritanical at the time, and the filmmakers had to lose a few scenes that were considered too graphic, as tame as they might seem by today's standards. When it came time to market the movie, Paramount had an easy job. Jason in New York City, nuff said. Their initial poster had the iconic slasher cutting through the equally iconic I Love New York sign. But there were two problems with this. One, the MPAA didn't like the fact that Jason's knife was bloody, and two, the tourism board in New York simply hated the very idea of it and threatened a lawsuit. Paramount obliged and removed the posters that had already gone up, replacing them with Jason menacingly hovering over the New York skyline. What did stick around was a very amusing theatrical teaser showing us a motionless Jason taking a moment out of his day in Brooklyn to stare longingly across the river at Manhattan. That was not Kane Hodder, by the way. Something that also stuck in the actor's craw.
Take your best shot, motherfucker.
Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, was released in July of 1989, 2 weeks before the competition in the form of A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5 showed up. The reviews were unfavorable, which was always to be expected, but the box office results were just as tepid. The film opened in 5th place to a tune of $6.2 million, and ultimately wrapped up with a paltry $14.3 million. Making it the lowest grossing film in the series. Jason was just all washed up. And with that, Paramount quietly ended their association with Friday the 13th, having seen enough evidence that perhaps it was time to bury Jason for good, no matter how pitiful the finale. Of course, The Man in the Mask would be revived only a few years later by New Line Cinema and original director Sean Cunningham, but for many it was the end of an era. Jason's Paramount years had concluded after almost a decade. And for the Friday the 13th faithful, those are the only movies that really count. As for Jason Takes Manhattan's overall legacy, well, we're still talking about it today, aren't we? No matter how misguided and silly it may have turned out, the fans of the series are a forgiving bunch, and though it may arguably be the low point for the Paramount years, it oddly still holds a place in many of our hearts. I know it does mine.
You're dead, fuckhead.